Welcome to Past Tense, a modern conversation podcast. We are taking you on a journey of connection as we discuss issues and events from the past 400 years relating to finding meaning in the modern world with our distinguished panelists. We end each Past Tense podcast by giving our guests the last word and the opportunity to answer the vital question, what do you know now? We hope each of you will be able to answer the same question and say, I have just listened to the Past Tense, a modern conversation podcast, and this is what I know now.
Okay, welcome to another exciting episode of a Modern Conversation podcast. We have four distinguished guests today with us. We have James McGraw, Sarah Ezel, Dylan Turk, and Matt Wadsworth. So we'll allow each of them just a few seconds to introduce themselves, and then we'll jump right into 19th century. So go ahead, Dylan.
I'm Dylan. I'm doing history of the 19th century from Texas.
And your major?
Chemical engineering.
Excellent. Okay, all right.
Hi, my name is James McGraw. I'm an art major, specifically in illustration. I'm from Washington, and I have chosen to talk about 19th century landscape paintings. I've chosen two artists, Thomas Cole and Joseph Anton Koch.
Okay, all right.
I'm Sarah Ezel. I'm from Denver, Colorado, and I am doing the music of the 19th century, and I am going over classical music and working songs of the 19th century.
Okay.
I'm Matt Wadsworth. I'm a humanities major from Grand Rapids, Michigan. And I'm going to be talking about the philosophy of the 19th century, particularly nationalism and you could call it Marxism, but the Communist Manifesto.
Okay, excellent. All right, well, let's jump in. I think probably the best way to help understand is the historical background, Dylan, so that means you're up front. Tell us about your interest in France and how the perhaps French Revolution, Industrial Revolution, how all this helped kind of shape society as we know it today and influence especially the 19th century.
France couldn't decide between if they wanted to be a republic or a monarchy. After the French Revolution, they started the First Republic. That was a chaotic period with a reign of terror where they beheaded so many people. Also, Robespierre, one of the leading guy behind the beheadings, was beheaded, near the end of the reign of terror.
Why was this reign of terror? What was the purpose of it? What was the genesis of this?
Before then, King Louis the 16th, he was in charge. People were starving. The economy was in shambles, and he was living in luxury in his palace, funding wars and not taking care of the people, and they got fed up with it. Just revolted against him and the nobility, and they just started executing the nobility and the king. It followed a chaotic period where some other countries got involved and were declared war on France until Napoleon came along. He started a coup, then started the First French Empire. And that led to the Napoleonic Wars, where he basically either annexed or was allied with most of Europe until the Battle of Waterloo, where he was defeated. Then the King Louis the 18th was installed as king during a period known as the Bourbon Restoration. It was a constitutional monarchy at that time. He understood that times were changing and that he couldn't bring back the old ways of nobility. And so he didn't really try to force change, and he was a good leader. He kept he kept a lot of Napoleon's stuff.
His codes.
The Napoleonic Code, which is actually still used today. It's just frequently amended. And all was well until he died, and then he was succeeded by Charles X. He was more authoritarian, restricting press, compensating nobles for lost land during the Revolution, and until he was overthrown during the July Revolution and replaced by Louis Philippe d'Orleans. He considered himself the king of the French instead of king of France. He made it clear that his reign came from the people and not from not being divinely appointed. During that time, the middle class gained political dominance, and he sent out this push for reform. Reforming there was electoral reform and reform of the restoration of the peerage system. But a lot of it was more of an illusion to actually give himself and his supporters more power. Eventually, he became more authoritarian, started cracking down on other political parties, and he was overthrown in the Revolution of 1845, which sparked other revolutions in Europe. And during that time, the Republic, it was also a chaotic time. Republic wasn't doing so well, and Napoleon III, he was elected president, and then he decided to start a coup and started the Second Empire of France. And under him, there was a lot of industrialization and urbanization, and that lasted until Germany provoked Napoleon into declaring war, and they deposed him and started the Third Republic, which lasted until the 1940s.
That was excellent historical background in the 19th century. I really appreciate that. All right, I think this would make a really nice segue into what Tchaikovsky and other romantic musicians are doing. Looks like, Sarah, you have interest in Tchaikovsky's 1812 Overture, etc. How does that fit into what Dylan's talked about here?
It goes into the Napoleonic era, going into the War of 1812 with Russia. And that's fascinating to me because it's so, powerful, and music has changed so much in that time where it was, just strictly for religion, but now it's going into having a deeper meaning that connects to so many other parts of history. So with Tchaikovsky and his 1812 Overture, it's explaining Russia's victory over Napoleon and the French in the War of 1812. And he hated it, and he was not a very big fan of his work, and he was like, well, this is war. It's not supposed to be glorified. Mm-hmm. But because he was Russian, it was a little rose-tinted, and it was a little bit more let's go, because we did it. So it was really the musical end of the War of 1812, and that's just really cool.
So let's turn to painting for a minute. The Industrial Revolution will have a tremendous impact on a lot of societal values and goals and so forth. Tell us a little bit about Thomas Cole, James Joseph Anton Koch, and these Hudson River School painters, and what was their aim, what was their goal, and maybe how that connected with the Industrial Revolution, etc.
Yeah. Going into the Industrial Revolution, it was incredible to see that these painters were holding on to naturalistic values, and you could really see that in their depictions of the landscapes. They had mountains and bodies of waters, fields and valleys, and through it all, when you would view it, there was a heroic nature to nature. Mm-hmm. During the industrial time, we have this power over nature, and now at this point, you could see vivid depictions of all the beauty that's around us. And I think a lot of people really, really liked it and got very, very popular because with all the industrialization, it's lovely to have a picture of a landscape on your wall.
When you're living in the middle of London or New York City with millions of other people, right, with no landscape.
Yeah. You're kind of cluttered together in populations and city-states and so much.
It's bleak.
Landscape painting in the 19th century, before the 19th century, it wasn't really its own genre. In other countries and cultures it was, but in Western art, it was always paired with like portraits or, showing a biblical scene. But now you kind of saw things that were just the face of a mountain, that a painter went and saw. I'll start with Joseph Anton Koch. He was an Austrian painter from 1768 to 1839. What really interests me about him was that he was born in Elbegenalp as a cattle farmer, which is a very interesting. He wasn't born in a big place where he could flourish, and so he naturally had to move. He didn't have the money, though, being a cattle farmer, until he was found by a bishop. This bishop, in his free time, he would be painting and studying, and the bishop noticed him and decided to become a patron of his, and paid him so that he could travel to Rome, where he was able to study the works of Asmus Jacob Carstens. And on his way, he actually found a wife in Italy who was the daughter of a wine producer. So he has these humble beginnings, but with the help of the bishop, he travels to Rome and creates landscapes that were, he depicts mountains sharper than anyone before his time. And Romans and Germans who visited Rome will see his paintings from then on and be absolutely inspired by his work. Thomas Cole was has a contrasting beginning to his story. He's an Anglo-American painter from 1801 to 1848. He was born in England, in a place called Lancashire. Because of his beginnings, by the time he was 20, he was self-taught through books and studying other painters. And he started with portraits, but he slowly found himself being drawn into landscapes, which got him more and more attention. Specifically, the attention of John Trumbull, who bought one of his paintings and met him in person and just enjoyed his personality so much and his work that he decided to put him into contact with a number of wealthy friends, which became his patrons. These were like Daniel Wadsworth, Robert Gilmore, Asher B. Durand, and William Dunlap. And so with their help, he was able to talk to them, mingle with them, and they became like working together as friends, and they became this really popular group of artists.
Known as the Hudson River School, correct?
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much, James. Let's turn to Matthew and philosophy. What are some of the main ideas of either nationalism and or communism, the socialist platform that Marx and Engels create, that intrigued you?
Yeah, I thought nationalism was really interesting the more I learned about it, because I think we grew up in a really nationalistic setting. So it was kind of hard for me to understand how people operated without this, united ideal of what it means to be living in a geographical place under the same banner, One example, I think, is Japan. But I've only recently started learning about their history, which is more feudalistic to begin with. So the nation of Japan, as we understand it now, didn't exist, for a long time. I was feuding families, samurais, just kind of locked in this power struggle until 1868, when Meiji reinstituted the idea of an emperor, and that allowed the people a figurehead to kind of rally around. And so in that way, nationalism became a way of people identifying with one another and making this kind of groupthink, which has its dangers for sure. But in Japan's case, it allowed them to become an entity in the world, and to start becoming a key player in the economic region. Some of the drawbacks, though, I think we're seeing them today a little bit, is the tendency of people to make in-groups and out-groups. If you've been to high school, you know what that's like. But when adults do it on a national scale, I think we call it colonization, and a lot of people die. So that's, not a great thing. And I think we're seeing that today with ideologies, and Marxism has reemerged. I mean, it wasn't that long ago, speaking, across
1848.
time. Yeah, not too far in the past. And I'll talk a little bit more about what communism is and Marxism and stuff like that, but we see people again kind of rallying around not necessarily geographical locations, because I think with the comforts of life that we have right now, we remove ourselves from the base survival instincts, and with the internet now, we've become more idealistic because we're comfortable and we can philosophize. But I think one of the major temptations with communism is that it's on its face, it seems like a good idea, right? Like taking and allowing people more leisure time. Everybody wants leisure time. And the critiques of capitalism are poignant and real, let's see here, Marx commented on how there were two classes. There's the bourgeoisie oppressors, like we mentioned earlier, and then there's the proletariats, this class of people who are oppressed. And the bourgeoisie,
yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So in the bourgeoisie, they make all the money, all of the profit, while their workers are exploited and taken advantage of, essentially. He also points out that the system is really efficient. So we can make more goods than there are people in the world, just because we've kind of mastered the means of production. And so Karl's idea is great. Let's allow these people who are unemployed, kind of have that negative connotation. Let's let them be unemployed. And seek leisure. They'll work naturally. They'll find things that they enjoy, and then we can redistribute the money that we're so good at making back out to the people. And it just sounds like this really, really nice kind of utopian society. But the problem there is in incentives and things like that. So there are obviously critiques, but yeah, he was a big time challenger of the ideologies inherent in capitalism, which is just that it puts money and profit and gain above family relationships, and so I think Karl had a good heart, like he wanted people to spend more time with family and have good relationships and stuff like that, but the way that his ideals were used by people like Hitler
or Russia,
Stalin, it really Russia's a great example. We can see awful circumstances of people and it came from, the best of intentions, maybe. So
Yeah, it ends up being not the grand equalizer that it was templated to be, I think, and at least sharing the wealth, the products, the profits, and things of that nature. So, yeah, and we've all, in some way or another, been beneficiaries or suffered the consequences of all of these things. If you take nationalism to an extreme, okay, if you take X, Y, or Z to any extreme, left or right, then sometimes it becomes problematic.
Yeah.
So maybe we just give Sarah a couple more minutes to maybe a folk song that you thought was fascinating during this time period.
So,
And
I think folk songs are fun. I was very surprised to see how many folk songs and like work songs that we sang as children were from that time period, and it came from a very large part of the Industrial Revolution, not just in America but in England as well, because most folk songs were ballads that were sung by workers in the work factories because that's what they knew and that's what they were comfortable with, and it just completely grew and spread to this whole other level where they were doing it more as like a way to connect themselves to each other rather than to just be connected to their work. And I think that's really interesting that that's something that music can do. It takes them away from where they are right now, which is constant work and underpaid and terrible conditions, to, like, these are my friends. We're surviving this together and we're going to get through it together because music.
well, I've thoroughly enjoyed our time together. We really appreciate you coming in and meeting, and we'll go ahead and end our time together, and we'll have to get together again and chat. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
thanks.